Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's Ask Andrew show, Canada's first Facebook live streaming family law question and answer show. My name is Andrew Feldstein. I'm the principal of the Greater Toronto Area family law firm, Feldstein Family Law Group. We have offices in Markham, Vaughan, Oakville, and Mississauga, and all the lawyers at our firm practice exclusively in the area of family law. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, Fatima Khalfan, who is a former client of mine. Fatima is currently the CEO of Voices Connection Experts. She is also a licensed pharmacist in Ontario and previously founded Family Match Placement Agency. She is a single mom to two amazing boys and is a passionate seeker of living an impactful life. Thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thanks, Andrew. It's great to be here with you.
Okay, I'm going to start with the question of what advice would you give to a prospective clients who are about to go through the process?
To get a good lawyer. But more than that, I think making sure that you pick the right lawyer, someone who helps you kind of stay focused and gives you perspective on your end goal, because there are a lot of things that happen in the whole divorce process that can kind of derail you from that.
So one of the things I remember you saying during the course of our case was that at the beginning, you had a very different thought process of what it was about versus the middle, the end, and the kind of emotions that you went through throughout the process. And if you went back to the beginning, when you're first interviewing lawyers and where you were emotionally, where would you say you were at that stage and how you flowed through and got through to the end?
So, the beginning part with respect to, we had our interview, you were great in a lot of ways where you kind of mapped out the whole process, where things could potentially go a certain way, because my case wasn't specifically like black and white in a lot of areas. I think more on the finance side. So in that sense, I don't think there was much that I could have gotten more. I understood that process, but it's the emotional impact that you have and all these little things that come up in between that kind of derail you. And I know that when you're first dealing with it, like I would just react, right? You get an email and you don't particularly like the way it sounds and the tone, etc., and that makes you react right away. And then it'd be like one of those things where you kind of blow up and you want to fight back. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that you're, going through this divorce process. So you bring a lot of the emotions from the fact that you're splitting up into your process. That I didn't anticipate. That was the hardest part, I think. But looking back, what I would love to have changed was, I guess, keeping that calm perspective. I learned to be patient. I learned not to react right away initially.
At the beginning stage, it's interesting that you say you want to fight back, because I think anybody who has gone through divorce when there's children and there's been some conflict, and most people have some conflict, otherwise they wouldn't be divorced. I say to clients now, when they get that email or that text and they're angry and they want to respond, I tell them two things. One, wait till you're calm. And if you want to write something, because sometimes writing is really cathartic. So if you got an email and you want to respond to an email, write it back to a blank. Don't put somebody's name in, because sometimes when we're moving our mouse around, we may hit a button and send something that we really don't want to send. And it may say some horrible, horrible things in it. I mean, I've seen cases where somebody has written some things because they're just really angry, and, it has horrible language in it where they're calling their former spouse horrific names. And if you want to write that on your computer and keep it on your computer because it makes you feel good for a little bit, okay, all the power to you, but don't send it.
Agreed. 100% agreed.
And that's why you don't put their name on it. You type it, you feel better. Then you can go revise it, clean it up. Obviously, make sure your kids don't see it, because that's another way to cause a lot of problems. But do what you need to do to get that anger out in a positive way, meaning don't take it to the kids, don't send it to the other side. And then once you're calm, send the email. Once you're able to be calm and send something reasonable and balanced, and that's part of handling your emotions. One of the tactics that I've seen, and I see it over and over again, and people think they're really smart with this one. We write a letter and we send it to the other side. It may have a settlement proposal or something along those lines. And the other side will wait sometimes 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever. and they'll come back with a real aggressive response. And it's uncanny how many times you get that letter the day after somebody goes on a vacation.
It's true, right? I think that happened. Yeah.
It happens all the time. And that's also part of trying to get the anger flowing. And that's one of the things you also have to realize, to be conscious of, that if you're going to do it to the other side, they're going to do it back to you. So if you're doing a response, be cognizant to tell your lawyer not to do it at a certain time. If you know it's a holiday, it's somebody's birthday, it may seem like a small little thing, but it's unbelievable how on the other side, you sent me that horrible email on my 50th birthday, and you did that intentionally to ruin my 50th birthday. You know, that's the kind of things we see. And you really want to avoid that. I remember once I had a process server we were suing not only the spouse, but the grandparents as well for some technical reasons. And I gave it to the process server, say on December 20th, and the process server serves the grandparents and the mother December 24th at 5:30 p.m. You can imagine every time I go to court, I hear about when that's served. I obviously ruined somebody's Christmas Eve. Be cognizant of that. Now, we talk about the beginning stages, but how did you find that you moved through those emotional stages from the beginning where you're revved up, you're ready to fight, you have the anger in you? At what point did you start realizing some of that is just not worth it?
So you helped me with that in a lot of ways, because you would always point out the end goal. Like whenever I was kind of worked up about something, you'd say, okay, Fatima, so if you're going to fight this is what it's going to look like. This is how it's going to play out. This is this one path. This is that path. And then you talk about the logic, but then you'd also talk about the cost associated with that as well too, which would automatically kind of make me simmer down a bit. Which is a great thing. So it's funny, one of my friends and I, who's also a former client of me, would always say, we turn to Andrew because Andrew's really the only one who can help us. You know, we have friends that we vent to, and we have family members, but I found in my instance, sometimes my family members love me so much that they would get angrier than I was, which was not, conducive to me bringing this to the end goal. And you learn patience. I mean, that's the one thing I've learned in life. Patience is the one thing that you can never have enough of. So stop. And I really tap into that more today than ever before, where you stop and then you just wait till you're in a place where you can respond. You have to be able to take the emotions out of whatever email they sent you and just respond to the facts. Practicing that is the only thing you can do.
Well, the piece I really like what you said was about what family members and friends do. As lawyers, we sometimes call them the cheerleaders.
Okay.
And the problem is, when you go to court or you go to a mediation or you go to the lawyer's office and your whole nucleus of your family and your friends are all waiting to hear what the lawyer said, and then you tell them certain things and they'll say, well, did you say this? Did you say that? Did you tell him or her that? And they go through this whole list. And what they do is they ramp up the client for the conflict.
Yeah.
And they're not doing it from a bad place. They're doing it from a good place. But the practical reality is, they're not the ones who live with the ramifications of the conflict on a day-to-day basis. It's not their kids that are being impacted from the conflict. And they're also usually, but sometimes the grandparents do, they're not paying the bill for the conflict. And so it means you got to take what they're saying with a grain of salt, because it's really easy for them to say that. And they also put things in context. I mean, one of them that I hear quite frequently is somebody will say, and people always like to phrase it this way, do you mean to tell me that the law says? Because they sort it out in such a way that the law has to be ridiculous because it doesn't fit their narrative. But it's, do you mean to tell me that my former spouse can cheat on me and then I'm gonna have to pay support to that person? And you bluntly say, yes, that's reality. And then they'll come back after speaking to the cheerleaders with 20 different new reasons in their mind that they shouldn't have to pay. And it's really important for people to get grounded in understanding as a lawyer. It's not my role to give you success in terms of morality from what your sense of morality is right or wrong. You may be entirely correct, but the law doesn't necessarily agree with that. And that's part of where we all have problems in managing where we're at. And I'm not speaking about your case when I'm giving that kind of example. I'm speaking in terms of generalities, but it's a practical problem. And that means that people have to appreciate that when they have these family members and close friends that are cheerleaders, you really need to be careful in taking their advice. And sometimes clients will actually bring their parents with to meetings because they'll say,
you met my mom, remember?
yes.
She flew in from New York to meet you.
And your mom was a very nice lady to meet, but the really important part is it takes the cheerleader and it takes the client who then hears what I say, then passes it on to the cheerleader who gives you 30 reasons why you're wrong and I'm wrong to send you back. And it changes the landscape to being one of them hearing it, hearing what the issue is, and getting on board with what the potential resolution is. And sometimes that means when we go to mediations, we actually have the parents not in the mediation room, but in the other room, in the boardroom. And when the mediator comes in and we're caucusing, which means we're in separate rooms, they're actually talking with the parents too, because that parent may be an important decision maker for their child and helping them get to resolution. And it's really important for people to put it in context of where family and friends are in this. The one other piece that I'll say about it, generally speaking, family is good to trust. Be very, very careful with your friends and deciding who your friends are. I'll never forget this one case where a lady comes to me and says, Andrew, I was at home, I photocopied all the important business records about my husband's cash business, and I have them all. And I said, great, are you bringing them into us? No, I've left it with my best friend, so it's safe at her place. A week later, she comes into my office and she says, I didn't know my best friend was having an affair with my ex.
That's a tough one.
So you really do have to be careful who you're talking to, who you're trusting with your information, because sometimes that person that you think you're trusting and you're telling everything about where you want to get to in resolution and settlement may actually be talking to your ex. So be careful. Can happen with family. Usually the most trusted people are going to be your parents. So keep that in mind. Now, I want to circle back to, we talked about where the emotion was more or less during the middle and how you processed it. Now, your case is long since resolved. And how do you feel that you've gone on the emotional side of things since you were at the time of resolution and going forward now, which has been probably, I'm guessing, at least a few years?
It's been 3 years, I think. My case took 4 years to come to the end. It was a long time. You were like my best friend for a long time. So when it finished, obviously there was this great sense of relief, and I remember it because it was like on my birthday when you guys sent me my divorce documents, and I'm like, this is the best gift ever. Not so much that, I finally divorced, but just this whole process was done because it was very drawn out and it was very emotionally taxing. So there's a sense of relief, and then it's almost like now I get to decide what I want to do and who do I want to be. My focus is on my children and making sure that I have a very strong relationship with them. That's something that you have to do, I think, every single day. And a lot of it then came to, now what do I want to be? Because we've already, luckily for me, I don't have to exchange any kind of documents anymore. Like we cleared everything out. I don't have to come up every year and, reevaluate dollar amounts, etc. So that worked out well. And then all of a sudden that's in the back burner. And now nothing that comes up at this point is anything that's relevant to changing the course of how it impacts me. And that's the one thing I knew, that through this process, I did not want to live like that anymore. I mean, that's the whole point of separating out. So focus more now, not on this fight that I've had. I'm co-parenting with him. We have joint custody. There are moments where it's very easy. There are moments where it becomes a little bit difficult. You take it in stride, but just moving forward, because all of that has to be worth something. And there was so much that I learned in that process with respect to patience, with respect to how to also keep my cool, right? It taught me a lot of things on how I manage my business today as well, too, not to instantly react to something, not to instantly go forward, just to take a break, take a step back. It gives you a lot of clarity in that way. What you touched on with respect to friends and family, and I have friends who've been with me for many, many years, and then I've had friends who've been with me for years and no longer are with me. Ultimately, I think you have to make yourself strong enough to know what you want. And then The people who are there to support you will support you, but they shouldn't be able to veer off or influence what your end goal is, because it is your life, it is your children. My family, my parents have always been great and supportive. But at the end of the day, they're not raising my kids. They feel that way because I'm their child, which I completely understood. However, at the end of the day, you have to be strong enough in what you want. And then you have to be focused on that. And the people that come along with you for the ride, they're great. Hopefully they add to it. If they're negative, make those evaluations, right? We've gone through too much with this whole divorce process to turn around and live that same life again. That's how I see it.
It's a great way to look at it. I remember the day when I signed my separation agreement with my ex, and it was before it was a thing to do the, the last selfie picture. We actually did it. And when I looked at that picture, you can really see who's writing the check and who's receiving the check based on who looks happy.
Smiling the biggest.
But I remember that day distinctly because it felt good as a type A personality that I am. It was the first time. It took me with my ex just under a year and a half for us to resolve our case. And when we did, the nice piece as a type A personality is now knowing at least where I stood. I knew what my parenting time was. I knew where my financial position was. I could start to plan. Because in that intervening period of time, I've always said to people, and I really appreciated it when I became a separated spouse, even though I do this for a living, it really came through to me, the economic uncertainty, because I knew each avenue, I knew each potential place it was going to go. But until you have an agreement, you don't know with certainty because things are arguments, things are gray. And that sense felt very good. And so I remember that day distinctly. Being able to sign it up and be happy that it was signed up, be happy that I was, ready to move on. And it was a chapter that was probably, I would say, it's one of the most difficult and challenging times that you go through in that intervening period of uncertainty before you get to the agreement. For me, I'll never forget, after I signed the agreement, I go visit my mother in the ICU before she passed away a few months later. So I had that double burden that I was going through at that point, which makes it harder. And a lot of people go through those kinds of things. But that sense of, okay, now I'm ready to move on with the rest of my life is really an important thing. And for many people, it's a terrific day. I remember one client, we were in downtown boardroom in one of those great big boardrooms. And we had, the lawyers on each side, the mediator, who is a very well-known family law lawyer, mid-70s. And when my client settles the case, he does a Rocky dance around the table and wants to hug everybody. So you get different people react in different ways. And that client, big bubbly personality, I still talk to him. That was probably about at least 15 years ago. And I still talk to him occasionally. Different people handle it in different ways, but I know a lot of people on the day they do the deal, there's a sense of, fine, I'm ready to move on now.
Yeah, uncertainty definitely is a very hard thing to handle in life. I think any kind of uncertainty always is the case. And that adds to the whole process as well, too, because while you're going through the process, you've got the emotions, you've got this back and forth, like fighting because of unresolved issues, and then add the uncertainty to everything. Timelines, that was the one thing that blew my mind a little bit, how long things can get dragged out if any party wants it to. And there's no control involved as well, too. I'm not somebody who has to control things particularly. I like to control what I know. So that was really tough because I didn't have control over that at all. I knew what I knew, and I was going one direction, but if that other person's not coming in that direction with you, it doesn't matter. So that was another thing. But I'm glad you said something, because you talked about how you've gone through the whole process. And I'm going to be honest, and this isn't like a plug, I think that makes you a better lawyer, because you were able to help me define the differences between things that actually matter and impactful to my whole process and my end goal versus things that, really didn't matter. I remember you said this to me, and this sticks to me all the time, because Fatima, are you going to fight over whether your kid is getting served hot dogs for dinner? Because you may not think hot dogs are a good meal to have, but at the end of the day, is that more important than your child having a relationship with their parents? And that always stays with me. That hot dog analogy always stays with me, because really at the end of the day, we do have to look at that. And, you know, we always talk about the children's best interest and all those kind of things, but sometimes it's really hard to stay focused on when you're feeling you're being attacked personally for so many different things. And the one thing, which is probably the toughest part about divorce, especially if it's not an easy divorce, I don't even know if those exist, by the way, is that separate out whatever attacks are happening to you personally and remove the children from it, even if the other party isn't. Still do it, because long-term wise, and I've lived it and I see it, it's going to help you with your relationship with your kids, because they see everything, even if we're not talking, even if we're talking behind closed doors, whatever it is. And they'll know, they can sense feeling, they can sense the energy. And you always taught me to look at it in that way. And your hot dog analogy is going to be one that I take to the grave with me.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And when the other thing people don't appreciate too, when they're doing agreements, and I really started to learn it as my kids got older, is you're doing your separation agreements. In my case, my kids were 9 and 7. And you're planning, and in your mind somehow you're thinking your kids are always going to be at this stage. And your agreement doesn't always incorporate what's going to happen as you go forward. And I try to explain that to people, you know, simple things like they'll say, well, on a holiday weekend, you know, let's say Christmas Day, the kids will come to my house at 8 a.m. because they're thinking they're little kids that are always getting up at 7 o'clock or 6:30 in the morning. And I tell them, well, one day your kids are going to be teenagers and they're not going to want to get out of bed till 11.
Yeah.
You know, and you have to realize things change. And the nice thing, as kids get older, you actually have a lot less interaction with your former spouse because the activities are fewer. So you're not both there at the awkward activities, both watching the kids, because unless they're in something competitive, you're doing that less. And the decisions become a lot more obvious as they get older. You know, you have a choice of what university the child's going to. Well, a big part of that decision is going to be made by the child.
Yeah.
You know, and those decisions almost get made. I mean, yeah, you may have some arguments about if my child's not going to, residence isn't an option right now in COVID times, but there may be an argument about, is this rental too much? Is it too little? But overall, the things that you have to fight about as your kids get older are a lot less. Yeah. And that actually is a wonderful thing as a parent, because the conflict gets reduced and reduced and reduced. And enjoy that. It makes it easier to move on with your life.
For sure, 100%.
So I wanted to find out from your vantage point, as you know, our firm just does family law. And you picked us as a firm that just did that. What was the reason that you wanted to deal with a firm that was so solely focused on family law rather than a generalist firm?
So I think I even appreciate this more now, having dealt with also corporate law as well too, with business side of it as well too. You know, having somebody who deals with family law, first of all, you guys also have sounding boards to bounce things off of each other. Whether, like, I know you are my lawyer, and Nick was on my case as well also. However, if something came out that was unique in my case that you haven't dealt with, you've got this whole team to kind of bounce ideas off of. So there's a lot of security in that, knowing that you have this huge firm with everybody with all of their experience kind of pooled together, where you will get the advice and the support that you need. Everybody was so great, you know, at your firm, with respect to just even the welcoming and everything as well too. So I think that's fantastic. I know when I've dealt with corporate law right now, and we're dealing with a firm that has like a lot of different things under their umbrella. It gets confusing. It got confusing in one of my cases because, you know, somebody from one side, whether it be real estate, has advice, but it's not the same when it comes to, like, you know, corporate litigation. And things did get crossed, which, you know, made it harder for us when we were dealing with that. So I find I have an even deeper appreciation for the fact that this is what you solely practice. This is what you know. This is what you live, eat, and breathe. And at the end of the day, that's what I want on my side.
Okay. It's really helpful to hear that. And I think it's good for people who are watching to understand, because there's a lot of lawyers out there who will dabble in family law. And the problem I always say, and this goes the same for people who want to do it on their own, is you can read a statute and a statute can say something. And you may be focused and say, well, a judge can do that because the word in the statute says may. But when I look at it, I have 6 years experience where I may say, it may say may, but I've never seen a judge actually do that. Or it takes incredibly rare circumstances to get a judge to do that. Yours won't be that. There's a lot that goes with having experience of doing it to have a feel and a sense of what happens in court and where to be nervous. What would you say was the hardest part of your experience of going through the divorce?
I think it was just the amount of time that it took, and I didn't want it to take that long, but unfortunately it did, and not having that control over the time of it. So I don't know if I mentioned it, but 4 years, right? When you said a year and a half, and I was just like, how did you get so lucky? I guess because you're a lawyer. But
we didn't go to court, and we successfully resolved it without any.
Didn't go to court either. The end of the day, be prepared, I think, for what you experience with your spouse as far as their personality goes. I think that's a good indicator of how certain things are going to go. I wish I had learned the patience part of it a lot sooner. And also, you're constant telling me, Fatima, look at the bigger picture. Fatima, look at the bigger picture. Eventually, I think I got there. And it took me however long, because maybe I'm a little bit stubborn. But not that much stuff. But the reality is, look at the bigger picture. Hopefully that gets you to your end goal a lot faster. But the fact that it took so long, that was very frustrating. But I mean, it's part of the process. I don't know whether we can't always get that. And it really does depend on the other side too, right? So that was probably the hardest thing for me to have to handle, because it just felt like a lot of it was unnecessary. And I'm sure I added to it as well too, right? I mean, I can think of some of the things. And you mentioned it, the pickup time ended up being something of contention in our separation agreement, which is so silly, because it was like, no, it has to be 9. I'm like, well, that's not realistic. And I'm like, you know what? We put 9. I could have avoided maybe, I don't know, a day or two of back and forth, because guess what? They come at 12 now because they don't wake up. Right? Like,
exactly.
Maybe there were a lot of those little things that could have made it shorter. I don't know, because luckily I don't remember all of it. But the time is probably the hardest thing for me.
Well, sometimes those little things are important at the time you're doing it, because you don't foresee that the kids are going to be older. And, if somebody wants the child to be picked up early, as an example, earlier than the child wants, well, they're going to deal with it when their child comes over at a ridiculous time and they're moody and they're angry, and you say, what's wrong? Well, you made me get up early. Is that how you really want to start your time? And if you keep it as a time that works for one and works for both, then there's no issue with it.
Yeah.
It works amazing. I mean, sometimes you have foolish little fights. I once had a case where there was a dispute. One parent was going to take the child on a vacation and take them out of school on that vacation day. And the other parent really didn't want them going, but knew it was that time, so they couldn't stop it. They said not 1 minute early. And what was going to happen is that one parent was going to get the kid up in the morning, drive the child to school, and the other parent was going to be waiting in the parking lot for the child to get out of one parent's car to go in the other parent's car. And then eventually the child, who was told, you're going to go from one car to the next, said to the other parent, this seems ridiculous. And then the parent said, okay, fine. You can just go with that parent.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example of one parent was angry, didn't want it to go down that way. And the child just looked at them obviously and said, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Children are so smart. We should all listen to our children.
Well, some of the time, not all of the time.
Not all of the time. Yeah, we should use a filter on that one as well too. But they see a lot of things, right? And I think listening to them, I think makes it a lot easier to co-parent as well. Also, with right now too, listening to where my children are, what they think is kind of ridiculous, what they don't. And I think there's always going to be one parent who kind of leans into their kids a little bit more. I mean, at the end of the day, even when people are married, they have this. So, I mean, at the end of the day, park your egos, try and get to the end result faster. It'll be easier for everyone, and then just live that life, because that's why you guys are splitting up anyway. So get to there faster, right?
Good advice.
Yeah.
Now, when comparing your first meeting with me to the end of the case, how ready for that experience do you think you were?
So I was ready for the actual facts of the case, the whole process and what it was going to entail, like what did we have to do and what are the things that we have to resolve and what are the things that we have to kind of come to, but how we got there, like I don't think anybody can prepare anyone for that. So again, the emotions, but it's funny because they're all the same, right? I think talking to some of my friends and seeing some of my friends now going through divorce, it's all the same. So just keeping that level head and understanding, or just being able to step back from the situation and gain a different perspective. And I think as much as this is hard, I try and do this. I try and get the perspective of myself versus, okay, how do I look to my ex, right? Because how is he interpreting what I'm doing? When you message and you do you're WhatsApping or texting, tone is something that anybody can interject. So being aware of that. So being very well aware of the tone that you put in messages, etc. Because I think everybody's goal should always be to kind of try and keep conflict at a minimum, but it's hard, but that's the advice I'd give overall. And that's the part that I guess it couldn't pursue, but that's something I think everybody has to go through personally.
And how would you say your expectations were managed?
With you?
Yes.
Honestly, Andrew, till this day, I always say to you, I think you're fantastic. I think you have a very, very tough job. I recommend you to anybody who ever comes to me. I stand by, as much as it was long. I think that was something that none of us could have avoided. And how you managed it and how I watched you handle everything for me, I wouldn't change a thing. And I've seen some things when we went to court. I saw this one lawyer with a client, and the lawyer was almost like egging the client on, saying, I can't believe your ex did this. I can't believe your ex did that. And I'm like, that doesn't seem right to me, because that's in a way prolonging this whole process. And you never did that. So I can appreciate that. There were times where I didn't like you, but I can't really remember them. But overall, you said you're type A, right? No, you're so knowledgeable. You totally, set me on the right path. I wish I could have gotten there sooner. I don't think that had anything to do with you. And over, anybody who asks me, I give them your name.
Well, thank you so much for those kind words. Thank you for coming on the show today, because it's been a pleasure having you. And I really do appreciate you sharing your experience. The next Ask Andrew show is on October 19th at 1 p.m. And if you have any requests or ideas for future shows, please email us at info@feldsteinfamilylaw.com. And thank you for watching.